February 28, 1901, Honolulu. Darkness fell over the sugar plantation like a heavy, unrelenting shroud. The tall cane swayed in the night wind, whispering secrets that had been buried for decades. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the dirt paths and wooden cabins, moving as though alive, though no soul stirred. On the porch of one cabin, Mrs. Julian Dorman, 55, sat motionless. Her eyes, sharp yet weary, reflected 1,000 untold stories. Tales of those who vanished without a trace, whose fate remained forever unknown. Phantom soldiers marched silently through the fields at midnight, their footsteps muffled by the earth, their drums beating without rhythm, without reason, and yet the rhythm carried haunting the very air. The plantation was alive with voices that should not exist. Ghostly strains of a violin drifted across the cane, warping and bending with the wind. Some said it was the echo of men long dead, trapped between life and memory. Others whispered of women taken by shadows, their cries swallowed by the night, leaving only a faint echo in the cabins. Negro superstition, concerning the violin, the haunting melodies that warned and cursed, had endured for generations, passing from slave to freedman, from mother to child, until the air itself seemed thick with anticipation. No one could say who disappeared first. Plantation records listed names, each marked fate unknown, but the files could not capture the dread. The wind carried murmurs from cabin to cabin. Doors rattled though empty lanterns swung, though unseen hands held none, and in the distance faint silhouettes moved, too deliberate to be human, too fleeting to be captured. Even the children feared the night, holding their breath, as the shadows crept, listening for footsteps that should not exist. Tales of phantom regiments, endless marches in the moonlight, whispered warnings of doom. Each story, each whisper was a thread tying the living to the dead, the past to the present, the known to the unknowable. And there, in the still heavy air, the line between history and legend vanished. Records of the Freedmen's Bureau reports of vanished laborers and ghostly tales fused into one. An unseen hand guiding the narrative, pulling the listener deeper, as if the plantation itself demanded the truth be heard. No introduction, no explanation, only the sound of the wind, the rustle of the cane, and the faint lingering music of ghosts who refused to rest. The story had begun, and it would not let go. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon, casting pale rays over the endless sugarcane fields. Each stalk swayed like a restless spirit, whispering secrets of labor and lives lost. Dirt paths wound between the wooden cabins, carrying echoes of footsteps long gone. Smoke from small fires curled into the morning air, mixing with the earthy scent of cane and soil. Shadows stretched unnaturally across porches and fields, hinting at figures unseen. Even the faint creak of a door seemed to carry a warning from generations past. Mrs. Julian Dorman's porch sagged beneath decades of use, its boards groaning softly with memory. She sat motionless, eyes reflecting stories of toil, vanished neighbors, and whispered warnings. Faint strains of a violin drifted through the cane, bending with the wind, carrying superstition and lament. Children stirred in their cabins, listening to whispers in the air, fearful yet curious. Every creak, every flicker of shadow, seemed alive with meaning, reminding the living of those who had vanished. Beyond the sugarcane, the forest loomed dense and misty, hiding secrets and half-seen figures. Shadows flitted between the trees, indistinct yet deliberate, like echoes of the past. The wind carried strains of ghostly music, warning or mourning, twisting through the fields. Laborers paused mid-step, sensing eyes where none should be, feeling the weight of history pressing close. Elders whispered tales of phantom soldiers and vanished workers, passing down caution through generations. The cabins held memories that no ledger could capture, faint handprints pressed into boards, names etched into walls, floors groaning with footsteps long gone. Doors swung as if by invisible hands, lanterns flickered without reason, and shadows stretched unnaturally. Every detail became part of a narrative of toil, disappearance, and lingering spirits. The air carried thick stories, pressing toward the present, urging attention. Even the smallest movements, the sway of a rope or rustle of leaves, seemed charged with meaning. Paths through the fields bent unpredictably, leading into thickets where unseen eyes lingered. Each step felt heavy with memory, as if the earth recorded the passage of those who had vanished. Tales of wandering spirits and phantom regiments rose from these absences, infusing the cane, the soil, and the cabins. The plantation existed in two dimensions, the living moving alongside echoes of the past. Even the faintest sounds carried warnings, binding all who walked there to history. Sunlight pierced the mist, illuminating fields, while leaving corners shrouded in shadow. Figures appeared at the edges of vision, vanishing when directly observed, leaving only the sense of being watched. Children whispered softly to one another. Elders repeated cautions passed down across generations. The rhythm of daily work continued, yet unease lingered, as if the plantation itself observed every motion. Faint melodies of spirituals drifted across the cane, connecting the living to vanished ancestors. Smoke from fires mingled with the scent of wet soil and sugarcane, creating a haze that distorted perception. Within the mist, shapes flickered: soldiers in faded uniforms, lanterns swinging with no hand to hold them, hands pressing briefly on cabin walls. These fleeting apparitions reinforced oral histories, giving life to vanished laborers and phantom soldiers. Fact and folklore intertwined: every shadow a story, every sound a memory. The line between real and imagined bent and twisted across fields and cabins. The plantation's boundaries stretched into forested hills, paths twisting unexpectedly, leading to hidden thickets. Laborers sensed unseen presences pressing close, the weight of past lives lingering with each step. Tales of wandering spirits, phantom soldiers, and vanished workers were alive here, encoded into the soil, the cane, and cabins. Even minor movements, a rope swaying, leaves shifting, seemed significant, reinforcing the intertwining of history and legend. The air pulsed with anticipation, both cautionary and mournful, echoing the plantation's memories. Every corner pulsed with memory: tilted roofs, broken boards, flickering lanterns in the wind. Shadows elongated unnaturally, forming shapes that dissolved when approached, teasing the senses. Children moved carefully. Elders moved, knowingly aware of unseen watchers. Footsteps, creaking boards, swaying ropes, all became part of the living narrative of toil, loss, and warning. The air thickened, carrying ghostly melodies that bound the living to those who had vanished. Sunlight fell unevenly across cabins and fields, illuminating laborers while leaving shadows thick and deep. Figures flickered at the periphery of vision, vanishing when focused on, leaving only impressions of silent observers. Children whispered to each other, elders repeated age-old cautions, and the wind carried echoes of past voices. Smoke and haze mingled with the scent of cane, distorting the edges of reality. Every rustle of leaves, sway of the boards, and flicker of light reinforced the intertwining of history and folklore. The wind rustled through the sugarcane, carrying whispers of lives long gone. Footsteps that should not exist echoed faintly across the dirt paths, as if the plantation itself remembered every soul who had walked its grounds. Lanterns flickered on porches, their light bending shadows into figures that disappeared when approached. Children tiptoed past cabins, aware of unseen presences brushing past, and elders spoke softly of warnings passed down for generations. Every board, every creak of wood seemed to carry a story of toil, loss, and lingering spirits. Beyond the fields, the forest loomed dense and impenetrable, hiding secrets and memories. Shadows slipped between the trees, indistinct and fleeting, like figures half seen from a dream. The air carried the faint strains of a violin played by hands no longer alive, twisting melodies that spoke of sorrow and warning. Laborers paused mid-step, sensing eyes where none should have been, their hearts quickening with the weight of history pressing close. Even the birds seemed subdued, their calls muffled by the stories hanging thick in the morning air. In the cabins, small handprints etched by children long gone remained faintly visible, along with names carved into boards. Doors creaked as though moved by invisible hands, while shadows lengthened unnaturally across floors and walls. Smoke from cooking fires mingled with the damp scent of soil and cane, creating a haze that made reality tremble at the edges. Elders whispered of phantom regiments marching at night, the cadence of drums faint but insistent. Each sound, each movement seemed a message from the past, waiting to be recognized. Paths that should have been straight twisted unexpectedly, leading to thickets where unseen eyes watched. Laborers passing through felt a chill brush their skin, a warning encoded into the very soil. Tales of wandering spirits and phantom soldiers were not mere stories. They lived in the atmosphere, in the air, thick with memory. Even the sway of leaves and the shift of shadows carried meaning, reinforcing the narratives of vanished lives. The plantation was alive in two dimensions, the living walking alongside echoes of the departed. Sunlight pierced through the mist, illuminating fields, yet failing to chase away lingering darkness. Figures appeared at the edge of vision, vanishing, when focused on, leaving behind only the sense of being observed. Children whispered to one another, their voices hushed in reverence, while elders repeated cautions learned decades prior. The rhythm of daily life continued, yet an undercurrent of unease persisted, as if the earth itself carried memory. Faint melodies of spirituals drifted through the cane, binding the living to the stories of those who had vanished. Smoke curled from chimneys and cooking fires, mixing with the sweet scent of sugarcane, creating a haze that distorted perception. Within this haze, glimpses of movement suggested soldiers in faded uniforms, lanterns swinging where no hands held them, and children's hands pressing briefly against cabin walls. These fleeting apparitions strengthened the oral histories, reinforcing warnings, tales, and folklore passed from one generation to the next. The line between the tangible and spectral blurred, keeping all who lived there attentive and cautious. The plantation's outer boundaries stretched into forests, hills, and distant paths that bent unpredictably. Laborers walking these paths felt the presence of something unseen, pressing close the weight of memory, and unfinished stories mingling with the morning air. Ghostly tales of soldiers vanished, laborers and wandering spirits were alive here, infused into the soil, the cabins, and the cane. Even minor movements like the sway of a rope or the rustle of leaves carried significance, reinforcing the sense that history and legend coexisted. Every corner of the plantation seemed to pulse with memory. The tilt of a roof, a broken board, a swinging lantern, shadows elongated unnaturally across cabins and fields, hinting at figures that may have walked the land decades before. The children knew instinctively to tread lightly, and elders moved with careful awareness, acknowledging the unseen watchers. Sounds that might otherwise be dismissed, footsteps creaking boards whined through cane, took on a heightened importance, as if each were a message. The air was thick with anticipation, both cautionary and mournful, echoing the weight of history. The distant town, partially visible from the plantation's edge, seemed suspended in time. Alleyways and streets carried shadows that did not belong to any living being, remnants of past lives entwined with the present. Music drifted faintly on the breeze, spirituals, and melodies played by hands long gone, their tones warning and lamenting simultaneously. Laborers and children alike sensed a presence watching, reminding, instructing even as they went about their daily work. Each sound, each shadow, each flicker of movement became part of the living narrative. As mid-morning approached, the plantation's story became palpable in every detail. The soil, the cane, the cabins each carried traces of the past, from missing laborers to phantom regiments, from ghostly violins to vanished children. Every whisper of wind, every sway of leaves, every faint sound reinforced the feeling that history and legend walked alongside the living. The plantation was a theater, a repository of memory, alive with stories, each one pressing upon, the observer demanding attention, demanding remembrance. The stage was fully set, the narrative deep, and the listener already immersed in a world where fact and folklore intertwined seamlessly. As the sun climbed higher, the plantation seemed to awaken with a weight heavier than labor alone. Reports filed decades ago by the Freedmen's Bureau noted absences marked merely fate unknown, yet the ground itself seemed to remember more. Children playing near cabins would vanish for minutes, returning pale and silent, eyes wide as if they had glimpsed something the living should not see. Shadows in the cane moved with purpose, stopping when noticed, then slipping away like water through fingers. Ghostly violin notes sometimes carried on the wind, rising and falling in rhythms no mortal hand could reproduce. The elders whispered that these were the souls of workers lost to the night, bound forever to the cane fields they tended. One case stood out in local memory, a young man named Ezekiel last seen at dusk, walking toward the far sugarcane rows. Witnesses claimed to hear his laughter echoing from the shadows after he disappeared, though no one saw him again. Lanterns left on porches flickered violently that night, and the wind carried the faint scent of smoke where no fire burned. Some swore they saw him marching with phantom soldiers, his uniform ghostly and torn, blending seamlessly into the figures of the phantom regiment. Others spoke of a faint violin accompanying him, a mournful tune repeating endlessly across the fields. Each account blurred the line between fact and folklore, leaving only the sensation of being watched. Elsewhere on the plantation, a cabin long abandoned became the locus of whispered horror. Visitors claimed to see lights flickering inside doors, creaking open and closed without cause, and shadows that moved against the wind. A diary discovered years later hinted at rituals performed in secret, invoking protection or perhaps pleading for the lost souls to return. The records never explained why the windows always steamed at night, as if someone breathing upon them from within. Farmhands spoke in hushed tones of children glimpsing faces pressed to the glass, vanishing when approached. The cabin became both cautionary tale and living evidence of the plantation's haunted memory. On particularly quiet nights, laborers reported hearing drum beats from beyond the fields, irregular as though rehearsed by no living regiment. The phantom regiment seemed to march in impossible formations, appearing and disappearing with the wind. Whispers of orders shouted and muffled, drifted across the cane, chilling those who listened. Even animals responded. Horses refused to enter certain fields, dogs whimpered, and birds fell silent, as if acknowledging presences unseen. These occurrences were recorded in oral histories, carried forward as warnings blending fear with reverence. Children were told to respect the fields, to speak softly to avoid drawing attention to themselves. Another story told of a woman named Clara who disappeared while fetching water from a well at twilight. Locals remembered seeing a spectral figure in her place, hands extended toward the horizon, beckoning unseen companions. Her disappearance remained fate unknown in official records, yet the ghostly figure persisted in stories. Lanterns near the well would sway through the air was still, and the shadows cast by them often formed shapes that mimicked marching soldiers. Some laborers claimed they could hear her voice harmonizing with the phantom regiment's drum beats, a melody both mournful and warning. The tale became one of many threads woven into the plantation's living folklore. Not all the missing were young or strong. Elders, too, vanished under strange circumstances. A man named Josiah, often seen teaching children to read, was said to have been taken one night while walking the rows of cane. Those nearby recalled hearing footsteps echoing for miles, though no one followed. At dawn, his shoes were found by a cabin porch neatly placed, yet he was gone. Whispers claimed he had been absorbed into the phantom regiment, forced to march forever, his voice joining the haunting violin that drifted across the fields. The pattern repeated in scattered incidents, creating a tapestry of mystery and dread. Even animals seemed attuned to the spectral presence. Horses balked at the edge of fields where shadows moved. Strangely, dogs growled at empty spaces, and chickens would suddenly scatter, as though unseen forces passed through the cabins. The wind often carried music violin notes, faint drum beats, and low murmurs blurring lines between the tangible and the spectral. Laborers, both young and old, learned to navigate carefully, recognizing patterns that hinted at presences unseen. The plantation existed in dual reality, the living performing labor, and the shadows of those lost silently observing or walking alongside them. Legends told of hidden messages in the fields, footsteps forming shapes that could not be traced, marks on the soil that appeared overnight as though the missing had returned to leave a warning. Sometimes children reported hearing their own names called in voices not belonging to anyone they knew. The elders interpreted these as spiritual guidance, reinforcing lessons about respect, caution, and memory. In these stories, fact and folklore intertwined so seamlessly that the line between reality and legend became indistinguishable. Each account carried weight, a warning, and a testament to lives lost and remembered. Even routine chores became tests of courage. Harvesting sugarcane, fetching water, or tending animals required careful awareness of the environment. A misplaced step could invite a chilling encounter, a shadow suddenly in the periphery, a soft whisper in the wind, a lantern flickering against logic. Some laborers refused to work certain rows after sunset, fearing the phantom regiment or the spirits of vanished neighbors. Every action was under the unseen gaze of history, the plantation itself enforcing memory and caution. Even laughter or music carried risk, potentially drawing attention from the spectral audience. By midday, the plantation seemed alive in more than one dimension. Sunlight illuminated the field's cabins and pathways, yet shadows clung to every corner, elongating unnaturally. Figures appeared at the edges of vision, vanishing, when focused on, leaving only a sense of being observed. Whispers from the past carried through the wind, reminding laborers that history and legend were inseparable. The faint strains of spirituals drifted over the cane, binding the present to the vanished, threading memory and warning into a tapestry that refused to end. Every detail, sound, scent, shadow reinforced the plantation's living story, drawing the listener deeper into its haunted reality. As twilight approached, the plantation seemed to hold its breath. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the cane, moving in ways the eye could scarcely follow. Laborers spoke in hushed tones of figures marching silently, indistinct, yet deliberate, like the phantom regiment of soldiers recorded in long-forgotten reports. Doors creaked in cabins where no one had entered, and lanterns swung without wind, casting flickering shapes across walls. Children clutched one another, recalling whispered tales of vanished neighbors, and music played by no living hand. Every sound carried tension. Every movement seemed a warning from the past, a signal to stay vigilant. One evening, a young man named Ezekiel disappeared while checking the farthest sugarcane rows. Witnesses claimed they heard his laughter drifting from the shadows long after he vanished. Lanterns on nearby porches flickered violently, and the wind carried a faint scent of smoke where no fire burned. Some swore they saw him walking with ghostly soldiers, his uniform blending seamlessly into their ranks. The soft, haunting strains of a violin followed, rising and falling with the wind, as if narrating his fate to those still present. This incident became a whispered warning for all who worked after dusk. Another story emerged of a cabin left abandoned for decades. Locals reported flickering lights inside doors opening and closing on their own, and shadows moving against the wind. A diary found years later hinted at secret rituals pleading for protection, or perhaps summoning the lost souls back. At night, the windows steamed though the air was still, as if unseen breath pressed against them. Children and laborers claimed to see faces pressing against the glass, vanishing before anyone could approach. The cabin became both a cautionary tale and a living testament to the plantation's haunted history. On particularly quiet nights, drum beats echoed across the fields, faint yet rhythmic. The Phantom Regiment appeared in formations impossible for living soldiers to maintain. Whispers of commands, shouted and muffled, carried through the cane, chilling all who heard. Horses balked, at certain rows dogs whimpered, and birds fell silent, acknowledging presences unseen. These events were recorded in oral histories, reinforcing fear and reverence simultaneously. The fields themselves seemed to remember the soil, pulsing with stories of vanished lives and restless spirits. A woman named Clara vanished while fetching water from the edge of the plantation at dusk. Witnesses claimed to see a ghostly figure in her place, arms extended toward the horizon, beckoning unseen companions. Her disappearance remained fate unknown in official records, yet the spectral image persisted. Lanterns swayed though no hand held them, and shadows formed shapes, mimicking soldiers in formation. Some laborers claimed they could hear her voice harmonizing with phantom drum beats, a melody both mournful and warning. The tale became a thread in the tapestry of the plantation's living folklore. Elderly men, too, vanished without explanation. Josiah, a man who often taught children to read, disappeared one night while walking the cane rows. Those nearby reported hearing footsteps echoing for miles, though no one followed. At dawn, his shoes were neatly placed on the porch, yet he was gone. Whispers claimed he had been absorbed into the Phantom Regiment, marching endlessly, his voice joining the ghostly violin that haunted the fields. Patterns repeated across years, weaving mystery bass into the daily life of the plantation. Animals reacted strangely as well, responding to presences invisible to the living. Horses refused to enter certain rows, dogs whimpered, and chickens scattered without apparent cause. The wind carried music, faint but distinct violin notes, low drum beats, murmurs that seemed almost human. Laborers learned to move carefully, reading subtle signs in the environment to avoid drawing attention. The plantation operated in dual realities, the labor of the living intertwined with the movements of the spectral. Every motion, every sound reinforced the presence of history, walking alongside the present. Hidden messages appeared in the fields, overnight footprints, forming odd patterns, marks in the soil that vanished by morning. Children reported hearing their names called in voices that were not anyone they knew. Elders interpreted these events as spiritual guidance, reinforcing lessons of caution, respect, and memory. These phenomena blurred the line between reality and legend, creating a landscape where the unseen coexisted with the visible. Each observation was a warning, a story, a memory demanding attention. The plantation itself seemed to enforce remembrance, pressing history upon all who entered. Routine chores became trials in this haunted environment, harvesting cane, fetching water. Tending animals required awareness of the subtle movements around them. Misplaced steps could invite encounters with shadows, whispers, or apparitions. Some laborers avoided specific rows after dark, fearing phantom soldiers or the spirits of vanished neighbors. Even laughter or music carried risk, potentially drawing attention from unseen presences. Every action became a thread in the living narrative of the plantation, bound to both fact and legend. By nightfall, the plantation transformed shadows, deepening fields stretching into darkness. Figures flickered at the periphery of vision, vanishing when directly observed, leaving only the sensation of being watched. Whispers drifted on the wind, voices from long-departed neighbors, phantom soldiers, and vanished children. Lanterns cast erratic light, bending shadows into impossible shapes. The scent of sugarcane mixed with smoke and damp soil, heightening awareness of unseen presences. Every sound, every movement reinforced the intertwining of history and folklore, drawing all who remained deeper into the haunted narrative. As night fell over the plantation, the records of the Freedmen's Bureau resurfaced in memory. Names marked fate unknown, stretched across yellowed pages, yet those cold letters captured nothing of the whispers in the cabins. Children remembered the vanished, their laughter replaced by the faint echo of ghostly footsteps among the sugarcane. The wind carried a violin's mournful strains, bending over the fields, as if narrating stories no living hand could write. Elders spoke of these nights with reverence, cautioning the young to move silently, to listen, to respect the unseen. Every shadow seemed heavier, charged with history and legend alike. A surveyor's map from decades past revealed the migration of the exodusters' paths that seemed ordinary on paper, yet aligned strangely with places of disappearance. Soldiers' logs from the war recorded men missing in action, labeled phantom regiment, their presence documented yet unexplained. These factual traces intertwined with folklore, ghostly soldiers marching in the cane lanterns, flickering in formation shadows moving against the wind. The plantation and the surrounding lands seemed to pulse with memory, every footstep of the living mirrored by those long vanished. Music drifted across the fields, spirituals twisted by ghostly presence carrying warning and lament in equal measure. In one corner of the plantation, a ritual site had been discovered, simple, yet charged with spiritual significance. Candles and offerings, long decayed, suggested attempts to appease spirits to call back lost souls. Oral history claimed that the deceased walked these grounds nightly, invisible yet palpably present. Children reported seeing faint silhouettes kneeling in the shadows, rising to march alongside phantom soldiers. Doors rattled as though moved by unseen hands, and the wind whispered fragments of lost conversations. The plantation became both stage and altar, fact and legend inseparable in the dim light. Reports from Harlem in the 1920s described similar occurrences, distant yet connected. Churches hummed with spirituals that seemed to carry messages from the past, warning of unseen dangers. Markets and alleyways held echoes of vanished people, while drumbeats from phantom regiments were faintly audible in the night. Scholars who visited the plantation recorded testimonies blending historical observation with tales of ghostly encounters, every account layered onto the next, creating a tapestry where fact and folklore entwined seamlessly. Even the wind seemed to speak, carrying fragmented messages across miles of cane and soil. The violin appeared again, its music more insistent, rising from the depths of the cane. Some claimed it guided phantom soldiers, aligning them in silent formation, while others whispered it called back the spirits of missing laborers. Lanterns flickered in rhythm, with the melody shadows stretching unnaturally to follow the unseen music. Children and laborers alike reported a feeling of being watched, as if the land itself had consciousness. Each note seemed to carry memory, grief warning, and instruction, binding the present to centuries of lost lives. The plantation itself resonated with this ghostly symphony. Near the river that bordered the fields, footprints appeared in patterns that defied logic. Officials' logs ignored them, yet oral accounts described soldiers, laborers, and vanished children, walking these lines in spectral repetition. Shadows bent and elongated across the fields, moving in precise, unnatural formations. Some evenings the wind carried whispers of names long forgotten, calling the living to attention, or perhaps inviting them into the ranks of the vanished. Music, footfalls, and murmurs became inseparable, a layered reality, both terrifying and mesmerizing. The night held secrets that only the brave or foolish dared approach. Scholars later analyzed these occurrences, noting the convergence of reports, oral history, and folklore. Cabin logs, maps, and witness statements seemed ordinary, until viewed alongside tales of phantom regiments and ghostly melodies. Patterns emerged, disappearances clustered near ritual sites, along paths in the cane near cabins, whose boards creaked without cause. Elders insisted that the spiritual practices observed were necessary, appeasing souls trapped in the plantation's memory. Children were taught to leave offerings, to speak softly, to respect the invisible. Every observation reinforced the idea that fact and legend were inseparable in this haunted landscape. Storms sometimes swept across the plantation, bending the cane and rattling the cabins. Yet even in the wind, the ghostly presence persisted. Violin notes carried through the rain, shadows marched beneath the downpour, and footsteps pressed into mud where no one had walked. Laborers paused, terrified yet mesmerized, sensing that the spirits were neither angry nor benevolent but watchful. The air was thick with memory, the land itself acting as a conduit between past and present. Every gust, every flicker of light, every creak of timber reminded the living that the vanished were near, observing, instructing, or warning. Some nights, dream narratives intertwined with the waking experience. Children reported visions of marching soldiers, lost neighbors, or spectral violins playing in rhythm with their heartbeat. Elders interpreted these as warnings, glimpses of unfinished business, echoes of rituals performed centuries prior. The plantation, alive with energy both tangible and spectral, became a liminal space where memory and legend coexisted. Faint music, soft drum beats, and distant whispers reinforced the sense that every living step echoed against centuries of loss. By late night, the cane fields seemed endless, stretching into darkness and fog. Shadows formed shapes that disappeared when approached, leaving behind only the sensation of eyes watching silently. Lanterns flickered and danced in rhythm with unseen footsteps, stretching walls and paths into strange geometries. Ghostly melodies carried across rows of cane, linking phantom soldiers to vanished laborers, forming a haunting symphony. Even the soil seemed charged, every footfall of the living mirrored by those long gone. The plantation existed simultaneously, as history, legend, and stage, each moment pressing the past into the present. As night deepened over the plantation, shadows thickened into shapes almost human, moving with intent. The cane whispered with the sound of marching, soft drum beats echoing where no one stood. Laborers paused, sensing the air itself vibrating with the weight of the unseen. Lanterns flickered in rhythm with invisible steps, stretching shadows across cabins, paths, and fields. The phantom regiment appeared, fully soldiers in spectral uniform, marching endlessly across the plantation, their presence undeniable yet untouchable. The violin's lament rose, weaving through the march, carrying grief, warning, and memory in every note. In one corner, a cabin long abandoned became the epicenter of strange phenomena. Windows steamed though the night air was still, boards shifted with no cause, and faint voices murmured from within. Children reported fleeting glimpses of figures kneeling, rising, and moving, as if rehearsing some ancient ritual. Elders claimed these were the souls of those lost, bound to the plantation in performing duties unfinished in life. Lanterns swayed with no hand-casting shapes that mimicked phantom soldiers and lost laborers. Even the wind seemed to bend, carrying fragments of spirituals and warnings from past generations, embedding them into the night. On the far edge of the cane, a young laborer vanished briefly, returning pale and silent, eyes wide. His story mirrored others recorded decades before, footsteps echoing after disappearance, shadowed figures seen only from the corner of vision. Each disappearance became a thread connecting the living to the phantom regiment. Each echo of a violin note, a reminder of those who had walked before. The night felt alive, the plantation breathing, pulsing with unseen watchers and lingering memories. Every sound, every flicker of shadow reinforced the presence of history, pressing into the present. Reports from Harlem and distant plantations resonated with the events here. Drum beats, faint but precise, marching figures glimpsed in moonlight, vanished neighbors remembered in whispers. Scholars recording oral histories found themselves unsettled, the boundary between fact and folklore dissolving before their eyes. Rituals performed at forgotten corners of the plantation seemed to summon attention from both living and dead. Shadows moved deliberately, aligning with stories and reports of vanished soldiers, missing laborers, and ghostly music. The plantation had become both stage and archive, a living theater of memory and legend intertwined. The violin reached its crescendo, haunting the entire field, bending the night air with its melody. Phantom soldiers fell into step with the rhythm, marching endlessly while the spirits of vanished workers glided silently among the cane. Lanterns flickered erratically, casting impossible shadows across fields and cabins. Even animals reacted. Horses refused certain paths, dogs whimpered, birds went silent. Laborers felt the weight of countless eyes upon them, alive and spectral, watching, guiding, warning. Each note, each step, each movement pressed the listener further into the haunted reality of the plantation. From the cabin to the cane, from the porch to the forest, every sound became amplified, every shadow a story. The phantom regiment and lost souls intertwined a chorus of movement, song, and warning. Wind carried fragments of conversations. Molna called long-ago footsteps of the vanished marching endlessly. Children, elders, and laborers moved with careful awareness, navigating this liminal space between history and legend. The plantation seemed to stretch infinitely alive with memory, shadow, and sound. Every breath taken felt heavier, every glance more charged with unseen presence. When dawn broke finally over the cane, the field seemed calm, yet the plantation's memory pulsed beneath the surface. The phantom regiment had vanished with the night, yet their presence lingered in shadows and rustling cane and the faint echo of a violin. Stories persisted, whispered from elders to children, recorded in diaries, journals, and oral histories. Names lost to official records were remembered here in the rhythm of life, the cadence of the wind, and the sway of every cane stalk. The living moved among the echoes, carrying the weight of vanished lives forward. Towns nearby bore similar memories. Streets and alleyways of Harlem held whispers of past lives, phantom drumbeats, vanished neighbors, and spirituals that seemed to guide or warn. Scholars researching the plantation often found themselves unsettled, feeling watched by presences that belonged to another time. Each layer of history, every story intertwined fact and folklore, creating a narrative too complex, too alive to ignore. Even now, the faint strains of ghostly music can be imagined in the wind, reminding all that the past is never truly gone. The children who grew up hearing these tales remembered the lessons: respect, caution, reverence. Rituals performed at night offerings, left on porches, whispers repeated softly, all ensured that memory persisted and that the vanished were not forgotten. The plantation itself remained a witness, recording every act, every disappearance, every spectral appearance. The stories became inseparable from the landscape, etched into soil, wood, and cane. Even decades later, echoes of the phantom regiment and the haunting melodies lingered. Memory and legend continued to weave into the present. Spirituals sung in church, ghost stories shared around fires, and tales told by elders all carried fragments of the vanished. The wind through the cane seemed to carry voices, a chorus of warning and remembrance binding generations together. Each visitor, each laborer, each child who walked to the plantation became part of the ongoing narrative. The past pressed forward, asserting itself in subtle, chilling ways. And so, the plantation stood alive with dual realities, the labor of the living intertwined with the echoes of those long gone. Ghosts, phantom regiments vanished, neighbors haunting melodies. They were all part of the landscape, pressing memory into every step, every sound, every shadow. Life moved forward, yet the past refused to vanish, insisting on recognition. Each whisper, each sigh, each shadow carried a story, a warning, a remembrance. The narrative was unfinished, infinite, and endlessly compelling. And finally, as the sun rose higher, painting the cane in gold and shadow, a question lingered in the air. How many of those who vanished remained here still unseen, marching, singing, guiding, or watching? The wind seemed to carry their answer, a faint melody, a drumbeat, a whisper. The plantation's history was not closed. It continued to unfold, its lessons alive, its echoes persistent. You have witnessed but a fragment, a window into a world where fact and folklore merge. And yet it is only the beginning. The story ends, but the echoes remain. Spirituals are still sung, ghost stories are still told, and the memory of the vanished persists in cane, cabin, and wind. The listener is left with a sense of the unseen, the weight of history, and the haunting knowledge that some stories never truly end. You have stepped into a living archive, a plantation where the past and legend coexist. And the question remains, will you listen closely enough to hear the next whisper from history?